Bago magsimula, i-explain ko muna yung mga guidelines sa pagbe-video ninyo. Una, ang pagsasalita daw, sabi ni Ma'am Vivas, ay dapat English. Pwede namang mag-Tagalog pero sobrang limitado lang daw. So, yan, preferably English ang pag-explain. Number 2, be brief. Maikli lang dapat yung pagsasalita. Dapat ay kung ano lang yung kailangang sabihin, yun lang ang sasabihin. Ang goal natin ay at most 45 minutes lang ang presentation. So, kapag unnecessary naman yung pag unnecessary, wag na lang nating sabihin. Number 3, create an atmosphere of confidence. Hindi ako nag-on-cam gawa. Ang laki ng sakop sa video eh. Hindi ko ma-upload yung kanina kong video. Kaya inulit ko, pangalawang take ko na to. Hindi kasi ma-upload yung una. Ang laki kasi ng gig. Pero ayan, number 3, create an atmosphere of confidence. Ipakita lang natin sa mga nanonood na alam natin yung ating sinasabi. Number 4, kung magbabasa ay basahin naman natin ng maayos. Yan lang. So, makulong naman tayo magbasa ng maayos. Diba? Hindi masyadong mabilis, hindi masyadong mabagal. Sakto lang. Number 5, yung pag-video natin ay landscape. Yan lang. Tapos sa mismong presentation na. No. Wait lang. Good day. I am Draxler L. Reyes. The purpose of this video is to help you develop your understanding with regard to the human rights situation of children and youth. I want you to notice how I use the word "and" to separate children and youth, this character. That is because in a legal context, children and youth are different. Children refers to any person under the age of 18. On the other hand, youth does not have any standard age group, even though the United Nations describe them as those people within the ages of 15 to 24. This interpretation is not universally accepted. Definition for youth still varies from country to country. For instance, in the Philippines, youth refers to those people within the age group of 15 to 30. So although nagbigay nga yung UN ng specific age group 15 to 24, ay hindi yun widely accepted. Magkakaiba pa rin ang binibigay ng definition ng bawat bansa sa youth. So magkakaibang age group, etc. Despite these differences though, children and youth sympathize in one concern. They are both vulnerable sectors of our society. A child is susceptible to physical and psychological violence due to their weak and innocent nature. Thus, a child always requires assistance in order for her to grow up in a vibrant environment, such as this one. On the other hand, a child without proper assistance will most likely insert a fork into an electrical socket. In other words, they will do many dangerous things that will put their safety at risk. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can go further down to see the worst. Hence, in order to prevent a child from inserting a fork into an electrical socket, the United Nations drafted the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the UNCRC. The substantive part of this convention will be discussed later. For now, we must first understand what a convention is. Convention is an agreement, but it is important to take note that this convention was drafted by the United Nations. Thus, from the word nations with an S, this convention is international or an agreement between countries. And the act in which nations sign into a convention is called ratification. I'm sure narinig nyo na yung word na ratified before. So once they ratified a convention, they will be called state parties, and they must adhere to the principles of the convention that they ratified. So the Philippines signed the UNCRC in 1990. Therefore, the Philippines is obliged to adhere to the principles that the UNCRC provides. Later, we will discuss kung ano-ano yung mga principles na yon, on what principles the Philippines should adhere to. Yan. Now, this is a blank slide. Actually, it's not. If you look closely in the bottom left corner of the screen, you will notice the word youth. Youth is often is known as the often forgotten group of our human rights system. Why? Bakit? For one, because they are vaguely defined. It means, as stated earlier, there is no concrete definition for youth. So it is always an argument whether someone is part of the youth or not. And also, unlike children who are vested with specific rights linked to the Convention on the Rights of the Child or UNCRC, the youth, on the other hand, does not have any kind of formal document such as that. There is no formal document that declares and protects the rights of the youth. That is why, until today, the youth is a primary victim of what we call ageism, or you can call that age discrimination. Now, for a review of their differences, children and youth are those people, children are those people under the age of 18. On the other hand, youth has no standard universal age group. Also, children have the UNCRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Meanwhile, the youth does not have any similar documents. Now, let's talk about their history. The early 1900s is known as the age of industrialization. During this time, fuel-powered companies, petroleum companies, are growing, thus creating a lot of jobs for everyone. And everyone includes children. And the problem is the working conditions is unsanitary and unsafe, and no law exists that will prevent and protect children and youth from the danger that working in these companies bring. So during the World War I in 1914 to 1918, 250,000 teenagers were sent to a bloody battle. If you have watched the Peaky Blinders, you would know how not only physically, but psychologically demeaning it is for children to take part in such a bloody event in history. That is why in 1924, this wonderful woman, Eglantine Jebb, along with others, campaigned for what would become the world's first international declaration of children's rights. So Eglantine Jebb, along with others, they campaigned for what would become the world's first international declaration of children's rights, or the Geneva Declaration on the Rights of the Child, or GDRC. Following that, in 1946, UNICEF was founded. Then in 1948, the UDHR was proclaimed. Until in 1979, and this is very important, in 1979, this country, Poland, proposed that there should be a convention that protects children. So after 10 years of negotiating and debating, after a decade of talking to each other, the United Nations set out the text of what would become the most widely ratified Human Rights Convention in history, or the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or UNCRC, of 1989. So the Poland proposed this in 1979, and finally in 1989, UNCRC was set out. The UNCRC is now ratified by 196 countries, and up to date, only the United States has not ratified. With regards naman sa history ng youth rights, similar to children rights, nagsimula ang lahat noong early 1900s din, during the age of industrialization. During this time, the youth was in protest, not for a convention or a treaty or a law. Ang gusto nila is a higher working pay. The youth is often discriminated because of their age. Sometimes, hindi sila hina-hire ng mga employer because they are too young. Or kahit i-hire sila, they are often discriminated while working simply because of their age. That's why in 1960s and 1970s, a youth liberation movement emerged around the idea that young people of any age could and should have the full and complete rights of all adults, and not just the limited ideas that were pushed around by well-meaning adults. This movement spread across Chile, Scotland, and the other one was in China. I think it was Hong Kong. But the point is, this movement spread all over the world. And up to this day, the youth, but up to this day, although youth rights have comparatively improved compared to 50 years ago, the youth still suffer age discrimination, especially in a workplace that has a huge disparity in employees' age. So nadidiskrimina pa rin sila dahil sa kanilang edad, lalo na sa mga lugar kung saan ang mga empleyado ay diverse ang edad. So may mga 60 years old na trabaho pa, tapos may colleague siya na say 21 years old. So in those cases, age discrimination could be may have a higher chance of manifesting. Yeah. So what we have concluded after reading everything, not everything, but what we have concluded after all the reading that we've done in youth rights is that there is no single universal agenda for youth rights. Instead, it is a fragmented effort that highlights the diversity of youth around the world. Now, I know history is a bit boring, so let's talk about the current situation. This is the summary of the history, but you don't really have to discuss this again. But again, history is a bit boring, so let's go on to the current situation or present situation of children and youth welfare. Yan. In 1980, 10% of all children born that year died. Fast forward to 2021, that figure has dropped to 3%. Also, even with all the viruses and suicide cases, the world in general still managed to improve the state of our children in a span of 41 years. Question, paano? How? How did this happen? So if you listen attentively in the history of children's rights, you would know for sure that a historical event happened between 1980 and 2021. That is, in 1989, the UNCRC was declared, which in my own conclusion played the most part for the commendable progress the world has taken in children and youth welfare. However, yeah, ito mahal ka ito. However, we have a problem. So even with a fantastic world average, the Philippines is sitting below the 50th percentile of children welfare statistics. How do you call it? Okay. The Philippines is sitting below the 50th percentile in children welfare statistics. In essence, this means that, and this means that the world average would have been better if only the Philippines were not a factor. So as Sherlock Holmes put it, Anderson, don't talk out loud. You lower the IQ of the whole street. It's like that. Like the average would have been much higher if Philippines was out of consideration. The question is how. In 2015, a report was published by National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children, or NBSVAC, showing that in every that 3 in every 5 Filipino children have experienced some form of physical violence during childhood. In clinical psychology, there is the term multiplication effect. This means that all the violences a child has suffered in his younger years, whether small or haunting, will multiply itself through the child's personality as he goes on further into adulthood. In short, ang mga nararanasan nating karahasan sa ating pagkabata is like a form of investment. So it's either your parents will invest good in you or your parents will invest violence in you. Or not really only parents, or it could be other people as well. Because we may not notice it, but a huge factor of us is how much physical violence we've experienced as a child. Yan. Another trending issue ito. In the past years, another trending issue nga is the online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, or the OSAEC. According to Civil Society Coalition on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Philippines emerged as the leading source of child sexual exploitation materials globally, with around 2 out of every 10 children at risk of OSAEC. Yan. So I won't talk too deep about this. The information is there. So in essence, this just means there is a poor policy framework that protects children from online sexual abuse. So later in the conclusion and the recommendation, we are to recommend something that we think is necessary in order to prevent online sexual abuse and other forms of cyber crimes in the Philippines. In the field of healthcare naman, we suffer from a significant lack of health workers and pediatricians. Also, less and less child is being vaccinated with immunity boosters, which is evident in the 2019 measles outbreak. So that the healthcare, the medical concern, or the medical aspect of children's rights is, I think, also not in a good state. Punta naman tayo sa brighter side. In the brighter side, yan. Yan, maganda yan. By virtue of RA 10931, or the Universal Access to Quality Education Act of 2017, underprivileged Filipino students can now enroll themselves in state universities for free, creating more opportunities for children and youth, kasama din ng youth, to enter their desired career. So I think this is a very good one. Like college is expensive, so I think if you really want a good career, you don't have to pay money anymore. You know, not everyone are scholars, so that's why state universities are now for free. And BSU is, I think, a very good state university, especially being the National Engineering University of the Philippines. Tapos malapit pa sa atin. I think it's a good privilege for us, especially because engineering will become, or is and will continue to be an important field in societal and economic development of the country. Now let us look at the laws. As instructed, we categorize these laws by whether it is international or domestic. Let's start with international laws. Human rights of children and youth are contained in human rights documents, including the following: the UNCRC, which will be our focus, the the UDHR or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenants o yung inaral natin this semifinals, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Next, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention Against Discrimination in Education, then the ILO Minimum Age Convention. Among these, as I stated earlier, UNCRC is our focus because UNCRC set out the most comprehensive list of children's rights. Yeah. The provisions of UNCRC adheres to 4 principles: non-discrimination, best interest of the child, right to life, survival, and development, and giving due weight to the views of the child. And we will discuss this for one by one. Non-discrimination. You can read this if you want, but I won't read that. Non-discrimination refers to each child's right to access equal protection and services, regardless of race, sex, religion, opinion, color, and other arbitrary characteristics that a child has randomly acquired in the absence of his free will, kagaya na lang ng kanyang origin, diba? Or parents. So in essence, this means na children should be equal in terms of services and protection that the government provides. Kagaya na lang dito sa Scotland. This is the flag of Scotland. In Scotland, where a kid named Bobby lives, Bobby was rejected from a school he applied for. Okay, why? Why was he rejected? Because he suffers ADHD. Thus, his parents filed a case in the court. So it is, by the way, it is also important to take note that Bobby is not his real name. That is because whenever a child is involved in a case, the state is obliged, I don't know how to read that. What obliged? Ano yun? Obliged? Ano ba ibang word? The state should the state should protect the child's identity by means of yung anong tawag doon? Dun sa Tagalog. Alias. Yun, ulit, sorry. Hindi ko to alam eh. Naalala ko lang. So it is important to take note na Bobby is not his real name. That is because whenever a child is involved in a case, the state should protect the child's identity by means of alias. Yon, alias. Going back, that law also applies to the Philippines. So we have to protect the child's identity kapag siya ay part ng isang criminal case. I mean, going back, this alias Bobby, so he won the case against his school that rejected him. And here's what his mother said afterwards. We are delighted that this case, with thanks to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, supports parents and makes an example of discriminatory exclusions in independent schools. Children living with disabilities have often been subjected to many injustices in their short lives. Being unlawfully excluded from school should not be another one to add to the list. We hope this gives confidence to other parents of children with special educational needs that they do not have to stand by and watch their families be discriminated against. Mamaya, dyan muna. Yan, okay, wait lang. Okay, so yan, example of non-discrimination. Okay, next. After his society, pagkatapos mong maglaro as a kid, a child goes home to his family. Except, not every child has a complete happy family to return to. Yeah, it's the sad truth. Some children may have to choose between his mother or his father, or an orphanage or a relative. For this reason, best interest of the child, or the second principle which the UNCRC adheres to, is, okay ulit, for this reason, ulitin natin yung articulation of sentence. For this reason, best interest of the child is a principle adhered to specifically in the Article 3 of UNCRC. So the article provides in all actions concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, courts of law, administrative authorities, or legislative bodies, the best interest of the child should be a primary consideration. Okay, so this article became grounds for its state parties para, how do you call that? Para i-guide ang kanilang mga korte in making a wide range of decisions that affect children. Because often, those decisions or these decisions are very sensitive for the child's development, which includes custody choices, permanency planning, or minsan, tina-terminate yung karapatan ng magulang, parental rights determination ang tawag ata doon. The point is, the courts make a wide range of decisions that affect children. So when a court reaches such a decision, judges must consider whether the decision is in the child's best interest. Yeah. That's what it means. That's what best interest means. Right. So what kind of condition should we put this child, or shall we integrate this child into, that this child can be his best? So there are a lot of choices, a lot of conditions where the court may put this child, and the court will decide which of these conditions is the best for the child. And next, clearly a child's best interest is rooted fundamentally to his life, survival, and development. The right to life, survival, and development of a child can be interpreted as civil, political, economic, social, and cultural right. The first paragraph, look at the first paragraph, it is civil and political because a child is entitled to be free from acts and omissions intended or expected to cause his or her premature death. So as a child, or as a premature human, civil right natin, or civil right mo na alagaan ka, at civil right mo na mabuhay ka as a civilian, from which if not fulfilled, if that is not fulfilled, then if your right to live as a civilian, and your right to live, or your right to be taken care of as a civilian, is not fulfilled, then therefore that will also deprive you of your political rights. Because how can you participate in political activities if, well, first, if you're not alive, or if you don't survive, or if you did not develop in a safe and educational environment? That's why it's a civil and political right. Now the second paragraph, it is economic, social, and cultural because the life, survivability, and development of a child includes creating an environment that will ensure a child's dignity, such as access to clean water, proper nutrition, security, and shelter. Yan. So it is economic, social, and cultural. Una, bakit economic? It is economic because as a child, we have economic demands. May mga demands tayo, such as access to clean water, di ba? Or food, nutrition. Now, it is a social right naman because we demand, again, the opportunity to participate in social activities. Siyempre, for our development yun. We really need to socialize. Now, this is quite tricky, the last part, the cultural part. So why is the right to life, survival, and development a cultural right? But the best that I can think of is we can think of it as our right to learn our mother language. No, our no, Filipino, your mother language is a culture, di ba? And how can you socialize if you don't understand or if you're not literate in your mother language? So I think, and this is true, we have the cultural right to learn the language, to learn the language in which we were born. And other international laws also provide for a child's life, survival, and development, such as this one, the Articles 25 and 26 of the UDHR, and also this, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Articles 12 and 13. Sa magre-report nito, hindi na talaga ito kailangan basahin. Parang pinakita lang natin, inilagay lang natin sa PowerPoint and sa research to show na may iba pang international laws na nangangalaga at napoprotekta sa karapatan ng mga bata. And lastly, so this is now the fourth principle. Lastly, a child has the right to be heard and his opinions must be given due weight in accordance with Article 12 of UNCRC. States parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, the views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. And this discourse, or ulit, this discourse about children's right to be heard is very interesting. One, for they do not have the full autonomy of an adult. So they're not adults, they're children, but they are still heard because they are the human subject of the decisions to make. So in other words, let me rephrase this in Tagalog so we can better understand. In other words, hindi man sila yung say yung the best people na kausapin dahil nga sa hindi naman sila gaanong kabihasa sa batas, di ba? Hindi din sila mature para maintindihan yung mga civil, political, and legal aspects na pumapaligid sa magiging desisyon para sa kanila. Pero at the same time, the reason kung bakit natin sila pinapakinggan is because of the fact na yung buong desisyon, yung outcome, the whole thing ay tungkol sa kanila, para sa kanilang best. So, at the end of the day, even if they are not the best people to hear, they are still heard. They still have the right to be heard. And not only the right to be heard, their opinions must still be given due weight in accordance with the fourth principle, simply because they are like the main character, something like that. Now may question tayo dyan. The question is, how much weight should the courts give a child's opinion? Meron ba dito? Okay, wala. So, how much, ulitin ko yung tanong ha, how much weight should the courts give a child's opinion? Parang, i-consider ko ba ang opinion mo? If i-consider ko, gaano kabigat yung mga salita mo? Gaano kalaki yung epekto ng opinion ng bata sa magiging desisyon ng korte? Ganon. So, to answer that question, I don't know personally because it is determined by the child's age and maturity. So, it depends kung sa maturity at sa edad ng bata. Yan. So, other conventions also provide for children's rights. One of them is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This law, I won't read this long. long paragraph. This law specifically provides for the non-discrimination of women of all ages and aspects, including cultural patterns, say like, are women allowed to wear this? Are women allowed to do this? And education, healthcare, and legal concerns. So in short, this is a convention that protects our women. Yeah, now this is the question. What is a woman? Although, as far as I know, woman does not have a concrete legal definition, but it is generally assumed that it includes everyone with an XX chromosome. So we know the chromosomes, right? XY para sa lalaki, XX para sa babae. So it is generally assumed that a woman is an adult female person with an XX chromosome. So some states may provide for a more inclusive definition depende sa kanilang local civil movement on LGBTQ plus rights. Another example is the Convention Against Discrimination in Education. And this was drafted to demotivate unfair practices in educational institutions. It aims to encourage and guide its state parties towards quality education that promote what we like to call a safe place for learning, free from bigotry and prejudice. And it also promotes, by the way, this also promotes free education. Now remember that last sentence. Free education. Okay. Okay, now consider the last sentence. But education is free. It is indeed. Education is free. Pero a lot of families, they still require indirect financial assistance to sustain their children's indirect educational needs. What are these indirect educational needs? Such needs include laptops, internet connection, books, right? Okay, so tuition is free, but there are indirect needs na kailangan ng estudyante para makatapos talaga ng pag-aaral. However, for some families, this indirect cost of education is just way too expensive. Masyadong mahal para sa kanila. Thus, some children, instead na mag-aral, instead na i-pursue nila yung kanilang diploma, mas pinipili nilang magtrabaho. They choose to work. So, however, it is a sensitive topic whenever employment and children is enjoined in one idea. Often, human trafficking and child exploitation is the result of a poor policy framework for child labor. Hence, the ILO Minimum Age Convention, as you can see in the screen, provides a comprehensive list of guidance that safeguards children's rights from the dangers of capitalism and employment. So you can read this if you like, but I won't read this one. With regards naman sa rights of the youth, international laws for the youth, as mentioned previously, there is no universal age that defines youth. However, with respect to the definition provided by the United Nations, the UN General Assembly adopted the World Programme of Action on Youth, or WPAY. It outlines 15 priority areas. At cada 2 years, it negotiates with the General Assembly to update such priority areas. So these are the 15 priority areas. Let us read this. Education, employment, hunger and poverty, health, environment, substance abuse, juvenile justice, leisure time activities, full effective participation of youth in the life of society, decision-making, globalization, information and communication technologies, HIV/AIDS, armed conflict, and intergenerational issues. So, however, the implementation of WPAY is significantly lacking due to its non-binding nature. Now, when we say non-binding, look at the bottom of the screen. It means having no legal or binding force. Unlike the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, it is legally binding, which means na kapag pumirma ang iyong bansa sa UNCRC, you are obligado ka na to adhere to the principles of the UNCRC. Because I think every 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, every 5 years, nag-check, kumbaga, ini-evaluate ng UNCRC ang performance ng bansa. If they adhered the principles or what. However, this WPAY, it is not the same. It's non-binding. Thus, the youth remains to be the often forgotten group in the world's human rights system. So it's a sad day for the youth. Punta naman tayo ngayon sa domestic laws. Let's go local. And how do we say this? The UNCRC is legally binding, as I mentioned, and serves as a guide for the Republic of the Philippines in developing laws that will allow them to keep their promise of following the convention's terms. Yan. The Philippines, they ratified the UNCRC in 1990. So 1989, ginawa ang UNCRC. Then 1990, the Philippines ratified. So since then, it has served as a guidebook for our legislative bodies in the Philippines in furthering legislations for children. And a famous domestic record that contains a few direct provisions for the rights of children is the 1987 Constitution. You can pause the video or anything, but I think in summary, this is about health development, education, religion, and economics, like proper care, nutrition, special protection from abuse, cruelty, exploitation. Those are the substance. Now this one. The Republic of the Philippines, by virtue of Presidential Decree number 603, otherwise known as the Child and Youth Welfare Code, na pinirmahan na former dictator and President Ferdinand E. Marcos, provided a comprehensive dictum for children's rights and responsibilities, as well as the parents' duty in the development of their child. So to be more specific, this code also provided guiding principles. Wait, inom lang ako. Again, to be specific, this code provided guiding principles in cases not limited to, for this just some examples. This provided guiding principles in cases like abortion, adoption, delinquency, and stuff. So to cite an example na, so meron ako ditong papel. To cite an example, so wala to sa PowerPoint, I think. Wala sa PowerPoint, so just listen. In all cases of adoption, the adopter must be at least 15 years older than the person to be adopted. That is the Article 27 of Child and Youth Welfare Code, Paragraph 2. So that law says that if I'm going to adopt, say, another person, that person must be 15 years younger than me or more. So I can't adopt someone who is only 14 years younger than me. I have to be 15 years older than them. Some provisions of the children, or some provisions for children, are also provided in other codes, such as the Civil Code. You can read this if you want. Family Code and Labor Code. Yan, sa Labor Code. Arguably, child labor is one of the most controversial topics in children's rights, sitting right next to abuse or sexual abuse. It is often associated with exploitation. So if you've heard of those issues, mga batang pinagtatrabaho sa mga factory, tapos hindi pala binibigyan ng sweldo. So that's why yan, Republic Act 9231 or an act providing for the elimination of the worst forms of child labor and affording stronger protection for the working child. So the law provides special protection for children through implementation of minimum employable age and hours of labor appropriate for a child. It also prohibits involvement of children in the worst forms of labor. Mm, dito, itong act din na to, uh, pwedeng ma-violate itong act na to, of course. Pero they also state sanctions. Sanctions are also stated for violations of this special law. And we also have the RA 9262 or the Anti-VAUSI Act, and also RA 9710, also known as the Magna Carta of Women. These laws seek to address the prevalence of violence against women and their children. There's also RA 9344 or the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act of 2006, which provides na, ayan, hindi natin basahin yan. Let's focus on this last part. So the law was enacted to protect and provide appropriate approach to children at risk or children in conflict with the law. For instance, a child cannot be subjected to death penalty and life imprisonment. Yan. So specifically, this law protects children who are in conflict with the law. So this is the term that they choose. Children in conflict with the law, not criminal or not suspects or anything, or not accused or anything. They are children in conflict with the law. So, the right not to be imposed a sentence of capital punishment or life imprisonment without the possibility of release. And this is very recent. March 4, 2022 lang. More than 2 months ago lang. President Rodrigo Duterte signed into law the Republic Act number 11648, an act increasing the age for determining the commission of statutory rape. Increasing the age of statutory rape from 12 to 16. Actually, this was praised by Save the Children. If you're aware of Save the Children, they are the world's leading independent children organization. Save the Children, kung naalala nyo si Eglantine Jeb, yung kanina, yung naggawa ng world's first international declaration on children's rights, the Geneva Declaration on Children's Rights. She is the one who founded Save the Children. Just for more information. So this law was placed by Save the Children because the Philippines finally recognizes children's right and need for protection from sexual abuse and exploitation. And so these are just some other domestic laws for children and youth enacted in the Republic of the Philippines. So RA 9775, the Anti-Child Pornography Act of 2009, RA 9208, Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003, RA 8370, and or the Children Television Act of 1997. And there are many more, but there's too many to discuss all of them. Yeah, now concerning specific laws that were enacted for the youth, or specific domestic laws that were enacted for the youth. So sadly, there isn't many. So kakunti lang. But if you can remember, kanina, it was stated na in the Philippines, youth is defined as those people within the ages of 15 to 30. Do you remember that right in the first slide? The youth in the Philippines are those people within the ages 15 to 30. Now, RA 8044 is the one who provided that. So also known as the Youth in Nation Building Act, which was enacted in 1995. This act defined the Filipino youth as those with ages 15 to 30. Yeah. Youth rights is also recognized in the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Kaya lang, yan na yun. There just aren't many laws specifically enacted for the youth due to the disparity between the members of their age group. Like some people are 15, some people are 30. How can we make a unifying law that still prevails inequality, but applies to both a 15-year-old and a 30-year-old in a holistic manner. So due to that disparity between the members of the age group, this is why I think there is not too much, or there is not enough loss for the youth specifically. And nonetheless, so since it's 15 to 30 naman, that means that a minor portion of the youth benefits from children's rights. Since if you're 15 to 18, that means you're 15 to 17, then you're both a child and a member of the youth. Diba? So nonetheless nga, minor portion of the youth benefits from children's rights, while a big portion of them, those with the ages 18 to 30, benefits naman from uh, uh, what do you call that? For example, the right to vote, the right to assemble, they're they're part now of the age of majority. So I think uh, hindi kagaya dati noon, they don't have the right to vote, they fought for it, and now they have it. So I think at best we're still in a good state when it comes to youth rights. Although there's not many laws, but compared to dati, today is much better. And I think we should appreciate that still. Although that's a natural consequence of human society to improve, diba? Anyways, for our conclusion and the recommendation, kung sino mang magre-report nito, it's up to you kung anong naintindihan nyo. Pero kung ako, ito may conclusion ako, recommendation na konti. Pwede nyo kunin, pwede nyo gayahin ng ideas, pwede nyo dagdagan, pwede nyo bawasan, it's up to you. Wait lang. So how do I start? Humanity in general, we are progressing towards creating a better and improvable environment for children and youth to live in. When I say environment, I don't mean nature. When I say environment, I mean the ecosystem or the society in general. So the environment is getting better and better and better as years go on. Kaya lang, to be particular, sa Pilipinas kasi, at saka sa iba pang third world countries, it's not easy for us to shift and keep up with the ongoing demands for children rights due to economic surprises. And what does that mean? For example, 100 years ago, no one predicted that cyber crimes would exist. But no one even 1970s, no one predicted that cyber crimes would exist. But then here we are now. Diba? So nung nangyari, even United States, even these developed countries, they were shocked. So we think that development in technology is one major key area to be prioritized when it comes to children's rights. And also, ito ba, youth rights, about youth rights. During the discussion, I'm sure you've noticed na parang konti lagi lang sa youth rights. Because youth rights is still very vague until today, malabo, di ba? So I think a more concrete legislation or document specifically for the youth would help in increasing their competency in life. So let's not make youth any more of the often forgotten sector of human rights system. So and another thing, this I've read this in a research paper. And the government should play their role as protection actors for children. Because in a study conducted by, how do you read this, Roche and Flynn, found that out of 21 participants, isa lang, only one was regarded by the DSWD. Why? He was regarded because of the severity of abuse that he suffered. So the thing is, that is 1 out of 21. So how about the rest? How about the other 20? Why are they not accepted in the DSWD? The rest was considered negligible. Parang hindi na sila tinanggap because I think that they think na the abuse, the form of violence that they suffered is not severe, or it's not haunting. Parang konti lang in Tagalog. So they were considered negligible. So in turn, they received help naman from non-governmental organizations or NGOs, or I think most of them receive help from sa kanilang mga kapitbahay. The thing is, I think we need more residential care units that are community based, because I can't blame the SWD because there's too many child abuse cases in the Philippines. So for the SWD to handle every single one of them would be too utopian of a mindset. So I think there should be a residential care unit that is community based. And lastly, and this may be a favorite part of this. Lastly, as we move exponentially, as we move faster and faster and faster exponentially towards the integration of artificial intelligence and digital technology in our lives, it's not yet too late to set up a separate government body that will oversee children's rights in the cyber world. I think we really need that. In some sense, our lives in the cyber world is kind of bigger, or plays as large a part as our physical or real life does. Do you understand that? I mean, yung buhay natin in social media is almost as big as our lives in the physical world. So if we have specific government bodies and specific laws enacted in the physical world, then I think we should have that also in the social world, especially with the booming age of Bitcoin, NFTs, and other and other uh, stuff about furthering of technology. So I think a government body, an independent government body that oversees our actions in the cyber world is not only essential, but it's necessary. And I think it's inevitable. So with that, that's it. I hope we helped you understand at least a tiny bit of the human rights situation of children and youth. Salamat.